Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 5 of my journey to Unguro card review. This time around I have 5 brand new cards, 2 of which are legendaries, and there's a ton of elementals in the bunch. So we're finally going to learn how the elemental mechanic works and how that operates and how these cards are all finally going to synergize together. So let's go ahead and jump right into this card review, starting off with the first legendary. It's also an elemental, and this one's going to explain exactly what elementals are all about. This is Ozruk, 9 mana, 5/5 minion, has taunt, and the battle cry is gain plus 5 health for each elemental that you played last turn. And that is the exact same mechanic that all elementals are going to have, not the plus 5 health part, but the last turn part. So essentially, elementals, I guess the logic is they leave some sort of, elemental energy on the board, and elementals you play in future turns will be able to take advantage of that fact. So playing an elemental on a previous turn will enact some sort of reaction from the other elemental synergy cards on the following turn. So for instance, you play 5 elementals on turn 8 somehow, and then you play Ozrock, he's going to get 40 health, or no, excuse me, 25 health extra because you played 5 elementals. So he would be a 5/30 taunt, which is kind of crazy, and there are enough cheap elementals that sort of thing can happen. Of course, the problem with really, really big all-in minions like that is that they're very susceptible to hard removal. Shadow Word Death instantly kills this guy, Siphon Soul, Twisting Nether, all that fun stuff will take care of Ozruk. Now, there are some classes, namely like Druid, that would have a harder time dealing with that with hard removal. They'd have to send a bunch of Jades in to kill it. So this card, I want it to be playable, I want it to be viable, but in many ways I think it's just a kind of slow, unreliable, inconsistent Ancient of War. In Ancient of War, although a playable card, isn't exactly like rocking anybody's world, is one of the best cards in Hearthstone. So yes, sometimes this will be a 5/20, and it'll be twice as good as Ancient of War for only 2 mana. But a vast majority of the time, I think it's just going to be too slow because it won't slow down aggressive decks. More control style decks will have hard removal to answer it. So in my mind, I'd almost rather run Sogoth the Slitherer than Ozruk, simply because that card's harder to kill because it can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So it can't be killed by hard removal, and it has similar kinds of stats as long as you don't have crazy elemental turns going. Now, this is an elemental itself, so it does feed future elementals and future turns for all that synergy. But ultimately, as cool as this card is, and as much as I like the idea of gaining a just ton of health, I really don't think it's going to be playable unless some sort of elemental synergy control deck really shines, and this is just one of the missing pieces that has to fit into it. But I don't even think this would be a defining card in that kind of scenario. So really, I have to sadly say Ozruk probably won't see a ton of play. So let's go ahead and move on to another elemental one I like a little bit more. This is a shaman-specific card, the 7 mana Stone Sentinel. It's a 4/4 elemental with a neat battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, there we go, same mechanic. Summon 2/3 elementals with taunt. So it's basically you get to summon some Feral Spirits Wolves along with a 4/4 body. So you can kind of break this card into 2 pieces, right? It's the 4/4, and it's 2 Feral Spirits. So Feral Spirits cost 3 mana with an overload of 2, so that's sort of a 5 mana card. And this is a 4/4, which, is probably a 3.5 to 4 mana card. So that's about 9 mana worth of value in some ways. Not exactly, not perfectly right. It doesn't work out quite that efficiently. But 8 to 9 mana worth of value for 7 mana. So if this condition goes off, I think you have to say this is a pretty good card. Not to mention it has that sort of Dr. Boom effect in that it's just a board reload. If your opponent wipes your board, you play this, and suddenly you've got 3 minions out there again, 2 of which have taunt, which is very annoying. So that's always been a pretty strong play whenever that's been an option, with like Dr. Boom, Call of the Wild, Stone Sentinel. Feral Spirits itself is good just because it can get some bodies out there really quickly along with the Shaman hero power. So I think this card has everything it needs to be really solid. I think it's going to be just fine. Cenarius is another example of a card like that. I was just thinking this is sort of almost better than Cenarius in some ways because it's 2 mana cheaper, and the taunts are actually slightly bigger because they're 2/3s. Doesn't have the flexibility of the minion buff, of course, but still, in some ways, kind of a mini Cenarius that's almost better. So I really do like this card. I think that Shaman already has enough elementals to make this work. Things like Fire Elemental on 6, there's a ton of elementals along the way. Stuff like Alakir and Ragnaros are big elementals, so the Rag is moving out of standard format, so that'd have to be a wild play. But ultimately, still tons of elementals for Shaman to play with, so I can certainly foresee an Elemental Shaman deck coming together really nicely, and Stone Sentinel being a really big part of it. Moving on to a Mage Elemental Synergy card. This is the 2 mana spell Flame Geyser. You deal 2 damage, and you add a 1/2 elemental to your hand. So, of course, the way elementals work, you're going to want to consistently have elementals out on the board setting up future turns, and you'll know what's in your hand, so you'll be able to predict to some extent. So it's good to have really low-cost, flexible elementals that you can play. In other words, if you're on turn 5, you really need to fireball something. What if you don't have a 1 mana elemental to set up your turn 6 play? A card like Flame Geyser gives you exactly that. It gives you a 1 mana, 1/2 elemental, that sort of flexible floating mana type minion that you can just play to set up the future turns and keep your elemental, aura elemental effect rolling through multiple turns. So that's really cool. I like that. Unfortunately, I don't know that Flame Geyser itself is fantastic. We've seen some other 2 mana deal 2 damage cards be okay with things like Rogue's Jade Golem spell, whose name I can't think of right now. But this is obviously kind of an Arcane Blast, but more expensive and without the flexibility. So I don't know. I guess this card is playable in an Elemental Mage deck, certainly. It seems like it should fit. It's fine. It's not Frostbolt, right? But it's close. It's workable. That said, outside of an Elemental Mage deck, I don't suspect anybody'd find a reason to run this. It's just considerably worse than the other options Mage has available. And the 1/2 elemental is just a worthless throwaway minion that really won't mean anything outside of elemental synergies. Perhaps against like pirates, this could be a super tech early anti-aggro card because the 1/2 is sort of good against pirates, but that sounds terrible, and I don't think that would be any good. So there's got to be better options. Ultimately, a playable card if Elemental Mage is a thing. Otherwise, a card that's really not that good and won't be played. Moving on to another Elemental card, but this one is a neutral minion. The Firefly. 1 mana, 1/2. Jade Shurikens is the name of that card, I just realized. But this is a 1 mana, 1/2. The Firefly, another elemental with a battle cry, add a 1/2 elemental to your hand. So this card, in many ways, just like the previous one, is all about just keeping that elemental plays flowing from turn to turn. Not only is this guy going to set it off because he's cheap, but he gives you another one to set it off in a future turn. So it just adds to the elemental consistency, which is probably going to be important. Certainly a 1/2 minion on turn 1 is not a particularly exciting play these days when there's a lot stronger minions out there. But if there are elemental synergy cards that utilize early onboard minions, like something that gives this +1/+1, this becomes even better. And I think it's probably okay anyway, as long as it allows you to fill out your curve and take advantage of powerful elemental synergy plays. That said, there have to be powerful elemental synergy plays, right? We've seen one example so far, maybe arguably 2. There probably needs to be 3 or 4 more really strong tempo-oriented elemental synergies for cards like this to make sense. But as long as there are, as long as Blizzard completes that and makes that viable, this feels like a fine card for elementals. But again, otherwise, I think pretty useless. 2 1/2 minions just aren't good in any other scenario. So if elementals are good, Firefly will be played. Otherwise, not a great card. And then finally, one last card in this review. It's a pretty crazy one. It's the new Warlock legendary minion, Clutchmother Zavas. It's a 2 mana 2/2. It's a beast. And whenever you discard this card, give it +2/+2 and return it to your hand. So yet another discard synergy card for Warlock. We've seen some crazy ones already from Unguro. Just absolutely stupid stuff that Warlock's going to be able to do with its discard quest. really scary that it seems like Blizzard is reinforcing this discard mentality to the nines, just giving Warlock a lot of different ways to both set up the discard style of play, but also benefit from it. And this is yet another card that does exactly that. You're going to discard this. It's going to be a 2-mana 4/4. You have the chance to discard it again on the way to completing your quest. It's going to be a 2-mana 6/6. Maybe it even gets discarded a third time. It's a 2-mana 8/8, right? Because this is going to chain together multiple times. And the Warlock quest is to discard 6 cards. So this thing could be discarded multiple times, and it's like a huge tempo play, sort of like a very cheap Edwin Van Cleef, where you get a 2-mana 8/8 out, which is absolutely absurd when you're already doing all this crazy discard stuff like summoning Silverware Golems and drawing extra cards from Alcazar's Imp. There's just so many different things to do, and then eventually you're going to get the crazy Nether Portal that gives you infinite imps. This scares me, right? This is really scary, because ultimately the idea with discards is you're getting some really strong benefit for discarding cards, like Doomguard, for instance. You're getting a huge charging minion that's way overstated, has an incredible charge effect, but the downside is you have to lose 2 cards, and that always felt balanced in Zoo. That was worth the trade-off, to have that giant body and apply that instant pressure. But now there's like virtually no downside to that. Like, you're not risking anything. Now you're going to play Doomguard, and it's going to say, give your minion +2/+2 and summon a 3/3. Because as Warlock gets more and more options to benefit from discards, the likelihood of it actually being a risk or a downside continues to go down. So on average, you're just continuing to benefit more and more. And that makes those kinds of cards really scary to me. And it seems like Clutchmother Zavas might just push it over the edge for being too good. Now, we haven't seen that in action. We don't know what the meta is going to look like. Who knows what Discard Zoo is actually, or Discard Warlock, I should say, is actually going to be like in Unguro. But cards like this seem really good, very strong, and terrify me quite a bit, because the potential just seems like it could be overpowered very, very quickly. And it's sort of a build-itself deck. You don't have to think a lot. It just all the pieces sort of come together, which means it's accessible to everybody. It could be all over the ladder in no time. So definitely a strong card. As long as discard Warlock is a thing, which seems almost inevitable, this will be a very playable card, and in fact a very frustrating and good one. So a great card that will absolutely certainly see play. So ultimately, when it comes to these cards, all the elemental ones I think are okay, as long as elementals as a mechanic works, particularly Firefly and Flame Geyser. Stone Sentinel will definitely be good if elementals work. Ozruk maybe won't be good even in an elemental world. He could be, you'll just have to wait and see how it all works. I don't know. I don't have a ton of faith, though. So, all in all, pretty neat little set of cards, and I'm glad we're finally understanding how elementals are going to function in Hearthstone. It seems like a neat new mechanic, which I always appreciate. So, all that said, that's going to wrap it up for me. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to hear what you guys have to say about these cards. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.